Minouche Shafik is probably one of the most hated people in America, at least now, since after she had announced that she's resigning from her position as the president of Colombia, everyone celebrates. And usually, when everyone celebrates, it's a bad thing. And we oftentimes come on the show and basically try to defend whatever situation has happened. But we cannot do it today. We have to agree. We also are celebrating the fact that she has resigned. So she has resigned. She is a third, basically third president of a prestigious university that has resigned, mainly because of the protests that were happening on the U.S. campuses that were pro-Palestinian. And so it's great to see she has resigned. We'll talk about, as I mentioned, we'll talk about also the celebrations coming out from both sides. But we'll also give everybody a small reminder about what was happening. So let me start with Michael, because I'm not sure. Basically, these protests were happening mainly in May, a little bit in April, a little bit in June, but mainly in May. I'm not sure if we had during that time Michael on, but I know he was pretty excited about the topic. So I don't want to, you know, make it really extreme, but Michael, when were you when you learned that she has resigned?
I was around. It was yesterday. At some last night. I was in bed with my wife, and we were thrilled. I mean, I interrupted what my wife was saying, which I'm usually not allowed to do, and she was glad I interrupted her, and we were thrilled. It's obviously too little, too late, and it comes on the heels of a few other of the so-called deans having to resign or being fired a few weeks ago. But great to see.
Yeah, truly great to see. And this now makes a three for the presidents of Penn and Harvard also had to retire. Baroness Shafik, because after all, although born in Egypt to Egyptians, the Egyptian government apparently had nationalized her father's business. At some point, they had to move to America. And she got an education in the United States and Great Britain, worked for economist at the London School of Economics, mind you. She's been a leader in academia and government. She worked for the International Monetary Fund. She was made a Dame Commander of the British Empire, and then she was made Baroness Shafik of Camden, and then became one of the most prestigious positions in the world you can have, the president of Columbia University in New York City. But think of what she allowed to happen. The New York City police, taking us back, if I can, a couple of months, the New York City police said, we can't do anything about this illegal encampment going on in the middle of Columbia University without you telling us we can go in and remove these trespassers. Now, I myself disagreed with the New York police on that. If the rights of people on campus are being violated, if they're being threatened, Columbia doesn't have a right to maintain a public facility where people are getting threatened. The police can come on. If I have an office building and people are being violently threatened in my office building, the owner of the office building can't keep the cops out to enforce laws of against violence. That's absurd on the face of it. So the New York City police had let this get out of hand, in my view. But she was the deciding force. You see, she was the one who said no. Even after, mind you, there's this illegal encampment going on, which is itself an act of physical force, forcibly taking the property that should be at the use and disposal of the students and teachers at that university. It is part of the university. And this encampment was not part of the educational program that these students had paid good money to get. So again, the rights of the students are being overtly violated, and she does absolutely nothing to stop it, even after they start breaking windows, taking over the Hamilton building, falsely imprisoning janitors, mind you, in the basement. So there were crimes of violence going on left and right here. And then finally, okay, police, you can now come in. No, she sanctioned, supported, and completely appeased this violence. She was responsible. Jewish students, and let me remind you, Jewish students were told to take their classes virtually that it was not safe to enter the Manhattan campus of Columbia University. As I say, it's not a cheap proposition to go to Columbia University. So you're spending tens of thousands of dollars every year for the privilege of what? Getting remote learning, like it was COVID or something, as if that justified it any either. But the point is, that's the level at which they were concerned about the safety of Jews. She was responsible for jeopardizing the safety of Jewish students on that campus. So it is a wonderful piece of news. And like Michael, last night I heard it with my wife, and we both smiled. We gave a little high five to each other. That's three now. And we can get all the presidents of all the Ivy League universities, all those fancy private schools to resign, because they have, from UCLA to Harvard, they have ignored the rights of Jewish students, or even just pro-Israeli students, mind you. No one who was pro-Israel felt safe walking across the campus. Places like UCLA, they were physically blocked from walking across the campus just to do ordinary business. So yeah, this is a little late in coming, but tremendously good news. I'm so glad Lady Shafik has to head out and go back. I understand the Labor government, the newly elected Labor government, has just employed her. That's probably a more suitable fit, I would say.
Yeah, we can maybe talk about the fact that she has been immediately rehired a bit later, but just something I'd like to mention. So when I was looking for an article about it, I somehow picked like the best articles. Because I read one from Rolling Stones and one from Middle East Eye, the best kind of news for objective news sourcing. But the way they've expressed basically the whole situation, they've considered what the protesters were doing as a non-violent protesting, which for a second I was thinking, yeah, you might get away with calling it that, but again, it wasn't organized by the university, it wasn't allowed. But then I remembered, no, what do you mean? They took over a building, they stopped many students from going in, they've stopped people from freely moving around. What part of this is non-violent? And
Daniel, can I just add?
Yeah.
I would like to know when the last nonviolent protest included people that wore masks. Because
Right.
I don't know of any nonviolent protests where people wear masks. When people are violent, they wear masks because they don't want you to know who they are. So the whole thing is a sham. I mean, it's a disgrace. The media are colluded, of course, with this, but of course it was violent, and it violated several constitutional amendments and protections, et cetera, et cetera. It obstructed people from liberty. I mean, it obstructed other people's liberty, including paying students. It probably violated Columbia's own student handbook, which of course I have not read, nor do I intend to. But I can't imagine somebody spending $80,000 to go to a school where any day you might have to go online because the campus might be blocked by rioters in masks. It doesn't sound like something you'd put in your student handbook. Sorry.
Yeah, and just to quickly cover, because someone in the chat was asking if she was sacked. So as far as we know, she has resigned. I think I have a quote from her. So she said that this period has taken a considerable toll on my family, as it has for others in our community. Over the summer, I have been able to reflect and have decided that my moving on at this point would best enable Colombia to traverse the challenges ahead. I'm making this announcement now so that the new leadership can be in place before the new term begins. And I was struggling to remember because sorry, James, let me just quickly. I was struggling. She reminded me of someone in some sort of media, and maybe someone can remind me. When you have like a person that is like, and I don't want to bog down with if she was right or wrong too much, but sort of like is standing for something, is trying to stand for something, is not calling in the police, is allowing these protesters to happen, even though we know they are targeting Jewish students, they are targeting specifically Jewish students, to not allow them to go in. They are occupying buildings and doing all that, and she's not calling in protesters, so kind of just like standing, having that, but at some point she just breaks down, falls down under pressure, and basically allows the police to go in, and so she's hated by these both sides. And I cannot remember of who she's reminding me. But yeah, that's sort of like a person that s- looks like has some sort of principles, looks like has some sort of beliefs. But when when the pressure starts mounting, you will completely lose it. And it shows how this sort of like pragmatism, this sort of like not sticking to your principles, whatever they may be, will not actually give you anything. It will get you hated by everybody.
And she is richly deserves the contempt. Uh, the distinction between the Rolling Stone article is very interesting because what they said is that were non-violent. This is the Rolling Stone article, non-violent protesters, but it was the police who were violent. No, wait. The initiation of force is the issue here. And if what it takes to undo the initiation of force of these encampment people was violent, then what the encampment was violent. You see, you can't have it one way, but that's the way it goes here. And if they want to make a distinction between violence and force, which is, of course, what all these leftist protesters usually want to do, they want to stop the shut down the Brooklyn Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge, which violates everyone else's rights. That is physical force. But you see, it's nonviolence. So we want to make this subtle distinction between violence and force. So it's the police who were engaged in violence at Columbia, don't you know? Not the protesters who were engaged in any kind of violence. It was overkill on the part of the cops, don't you know? And so she is hated on both sides, but the side who thought that she was too hard on the protesters really believed that the cops themselves were the problem, that she was the problem in ever calling in the cops, and that presumably they should have continued to go on taking over buildings, breaking windows, falsely imprisoning employees there, threatening pro-Israeli students, etc., etc., etc. No, it's this bizarre distinction between force and violence, as if somehow forcibly violating your rights is okay and doesn't allow the cops to come in and use any force whatever. Well, they're morally confused about the issue of force and rights, deeply and profoundly. The force they like is peaceful. The force they don't like, that's violence and overkill. And you get it straight from the Rolling Stone article. So that side, who are happy to see President Shafik go, are just crazed. What they want is more force against Jewish students, pro-Israeli students. They want more things like what happened at Columbia and UCLA and NYU to keep going on. That's what they want, clearly.
Michael?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we probably all give too much time to people like this, who basically don't believe in the rule of law and think that anytime they feel, because it's all based on feeling. I feel that this is wrong and it's my right. You know, they've also invented this notion of my own truth. And as a doctor and a scientist, I don't get to have my own truth, because if I treated patients with my own truth, they'd always get cured. They'd all be perfect. They'd live to 120 and be healthy. That would be my own truth, but that's not how the real world works. And if I'm an engineer and I'm building a bridge and I'm using physics, it turns out my bridge will last a lot longer than my feeling about how the bridge should work, and what kind of materials I would need and what kind of stress there is on the bridge and so on and so forth. I mean, we've put up, we adults, and I use that term not just cynically, I mean that sincerely. We adults have put up with this crap long enough. The fact that we have mostly humanities type professors at mostly humanities, so-called liberal arts universities, allowing this sort of behavior for too long, and it's been growing for a long time, and we now have political leadership that refuses to actually denounce any of it. It goes all the way up the flagpole, all the way to the top. It's just not surprising, but we adults have to put a stop to it. And we have to stop allowing this. People are entitled to their own opinion, but if they think 1 + 1 is 3, then their opinions are wrong and they're stupid. And that's okay. They're still entitled to their stupid opinion. Stupidity is not illegal, but it needs to be called out for being stupid. Just like when I have a patient who's morbidly obese and I tell them you are not going to live a normal lifespan. It is unhealthy. Even Bill Maher, who is hardly considered a right-wing person, Bill Maher said, just because we voted on it doesn't mean that obesity is not a health hazard. It is a health hazard. And it's the same thing with all of this stuff. Just because we feel that criminals might need to steal doesn't mean it's okay to be a criminal who's stealing. And just because you feel that that shouldn't be a crime doesn't mean it's not a crime. And it goes all the way up to this absurdity that you can set up an encampment in a public place on a private university where every student going to that university deserves equal rights under the university's own policies, never mind the Constitution of the United States, because most of these people do never mind the Constitution of the United States. And they are blocking people. And they are infringing on somebody else's liberty. It's a violation of the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and I'm not a lawyer. But it's absolutely absurd. And then to be masked and to be supporting an organization which is a known terrorist organization in US, UK, and everywhere else. And by the way, I'll just close. The fact that we have students cheering for organizations that are designated terrorist organizations by the US and the UK, and the students are cheering for that, and this is considered okay while they're burning the US flag as well as the Israeli flag. And of course, you're allowed to burn the flags, but not when you're doing it in a public place and impeding other people and obstructing them and distracting from classes. I will add one last point because I think it adds to this discussion. I want to point out that the protesters died away when school stopped. Now, the war is continuing in Gaza. The war in the north of Israel has heated up. Iran has threatened to annihilate Israel again, and death to the US, etc. And yet, these people feel deeply for the Palestinian cause. But during their summer vacation, their feelings went away. And the fact that we need a new president now for the new term, because we all know that these kids would rather go out there and put on masks and chomp around in their social justice rather than go to class and actually learn something. The whole thing is ridiculous, and we adults have to stop appeasing them, and we have to start kicking these kids out. There's plenty of kids that want to go to Columbia that are better students, are focused on creating some value in the world. And if they want to feel bleeding heart for everybody else in the world, they can start with Sudan and the 20 other places in the world where there are far worse problems.
Yeah, and just to talk about, I think what we've done, the campus Intifada, has really, I think, shown to the wider public what has been going on in the universities. Like the things that are taught are leading the students to do these things. I mean, universities should be this sort of like place where even sort of like the more radical opinions are, in a sense, accepted, because you want some place where people are free to express even to a large extent their opinions. But when it becomes this sort of, well, for one, when one side just completely decides, blocking the students to come in, starts taking over the buildings, as Michael, you have said, these are private universities. In a sense, they can decide what they want to do. But we should put the pressure, and I think I'm happy that many of the big donors have basically pulled out their funding from these universities. That's good to see, because on one hand, we have to respect whatever, if some university decides we are fully pro-Palestinian universities and will not even allow Jews to come in, you have to respect that. But you shouldn't respect anyone who donates money to such university. You shouldn't respect anyone who gets a degree from that university or who wants to go to that university. So I think this has really revealed what is going on in universities, and I think it's really good to see. But James, what do you think?
Well, first of all, the point you guys made about what's being taught at the universities is what's causing this is exactly correct. They are not, for example, I was discussing force and violence. They're not discussing what it takes to violate rights and what force is. Words, you see, are violence. Words trigger So they have this. What's really disturbing is this increasing view that there is no such thing as free speech if it offends, if it is hate speech, or if it is what they deem to be misinformation. I mean, Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick, the governor of Minnesota, has said that misinformation and hate speech enjoys no First Amendment protection. He is an advocate of censorship. And so when you have major politicians, the governor of Minnesota, not understanding such a basic American fundamental as free speech, we're in trouble. And the source of that is the universities, particularly the philosophy departments. But if you study philosophy or history at Columbia or NYU or UCLA, as Michael points out, in these humanities departments, and I was there, ladies and gentlemen, I have an undergraduate degree, magna cum laude from NYU, and you say shouldn't be proud of that. Well, it does. When I see the way the professor, I thought it was a better place once upon a time where Jewish students or pro-Israeli students would be welcomed, and that there would be a debate, as you point out. Words are just words. If it's just words, of course, let's discuss it. Now, in time of war, as we were discussing on the Daily Objective just earlier this morning, if you're in a time of war and someone is overtly pro-Hamas, you have every right to kick them out, keep them out. Did we have to let in Nazis during World War II? No, we did not. If Australia, for example, as we were saying on the previous show, says there's an increased threat level from jihadist terrorism, and they're letting in people who are just rhetorically supporters of Hamas, then they are jeopardizing the safety of the people of Australia. The job of the Australian government is to protect Australians' physical safety. Similarly, in the United States, Great Britain, I mean, you look at the protests, the pro-Hamas protests that are going on. They are implicitly violent in what they say, explicitly forceful in what they do. They block traffic, as I say, block bridges. That is physical force. The government has to respond. And the intellectual support that consider the universities, they get these protesters, and what do they say? We'll sit down and negotiate whether we invest in Israel, whether we invest in companies that support the American support for Israel. Oh, so divestment from Israel is something the universities are willing to negotiate. Once you start down that path, you have sanctioned all the violence, all the protests. You've said, okay, it's a negotiable thing. It's not a negotiable thing. Once they use force, you have to respond with force. Full stop. And if anything, the professors at these universities should be the intellectual leaders on what free speech consists of and what force and violence consists of. And that's the important distinction here. And it's no irony. It is actually causally connected. What's being taught at the universities is exactly what's leading to these university protests. It is the universities that are, as Ayn Rand said, the sources and centers of that kind of intellectual corruption and decay. It is no accident that in the United States, for example, the protests have been focused around universities. That's where it's coming from. These universities happily negotiate the support for Israel at a time of war in the wake of the October 7th atrocities, mind you. And should we be surprised that the students get a full green light to go and do whatever they want? To threaten students as they walk by, to block students as they walk by, to take over a whole part of the campus? No. If their teachers are morally sanctioning it, expect the behavior to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, and just something to comment on, James, you mentioned about basically, for example, the basically pro-Hamas protest going on in the UK. That's the problem that creates when you have this sort of like public property. When roads are public, where streets are public, everybody should be allowed. You have to allow. You have to allow the Hamas supporters. You have to allow the Nazis. You have to, and hopefully you also allow the Jewish, the pro-Israeli protesters. Also, that has been a problem in many cases. But yeah, it creates this impossible situation where once you start denying, you are in a sense denying people to express themselves. But that's the problem of public property. And the only solution to that is to get rid of that public property. If you want to protest, you can do it on your own property. As Michael mentioned, if you want to do it, burn flag, do it on your own lawn. You don't have a right to, as James said, to block a traffic, to stop someone else from the exercisement of their own property. You cannot go on someone else's property and protest there. You are violating their rights. You are violating, at the minimum, you're violating their property rights. But you could even make a case for in the case of America, you're violating their First Amendment rights if you are trying to force a certain speech on them or on their property. So I want to go, yeah, I want to go into basically the reactions we've seen to that. But before that, Michael, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. I think I would add that what I actually think should be done, and I mean this sincerely, is these kids have no consequences. I mean, my understanding is that in New York in particular, that the kids that were arrested for committing crimes that are crimes under US code and New York code and so on and so forth, were all released because, of course, the liberal DAs, and district attorney is not a term we should probably use right now in New York because they don't really have any, as best as we can tell. But the liberal DAs have let them go. They didn't charge, actually, they were charged and then they were released and the charges were dropped. So there was the kids, they were detained a little bit. But essentially they've escaped with impunity. One private equity firm, I was listening to a talk that he was giving on TV, and he said that they were using AI to figure out who these kids were because, in fact, facial recognition is good enough that you just need the eyes. Because remember, these kids are all masked. So these peaceful protesters that are supporting a terrorist group were all masked. That's how peaceful and wonderful they are. And the answer is let's unmask them. You want to get up there and say, I support Hamas, great. But I'm up here saying I hate Hamas. I think Hamas should be annihilated. And I think anybody that Hamas rounds up, brings next to them and tries to use a human shield, if they're caught in it, I'm really sorry. But, US went into ISIS and we demolished ISIS and we killed a lot of, quote, innocent people. But we didn't sit there and apologize every time somebody innocent. We said, we better kill ISIS or ISIS is going to kill us. So I really wish that we would publish these kids. If they want to stand up for Hamas, great, but everybody, it should be on their resume. I am a Hamas supporter. I will tell you, at my company that I run, where I'm the CEO, everybody has to sign a statement that says, I do not support organizations that are listed as terrorists by the United States of America, including Iran and all of its subsidiaries. And this is not just, we're not a public company. Public companies, you have to sign a statement that as an officer, that you do not do business in Iran or you're not contemplating business with Iran. But this is for a private company, and I demand that all of my employees sign that. I don't want to hire employees that support a terrorist organization. I think these kids should remain unemployed. And don't threaten me that they'll eventually become criminals if nobody employs them. Anybody who employs a person who supports a terrorist organization deserves what they get. And if they're worried about, violence because of these people, then go ahead and employ them. I'm not going to, but I want this part of their record forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, James, let me just quickly, and then I'll let you go. Yeah, that's a big problem when it comes to these universities. And we've seen some brighter light, and I'm not sure where it go, where I think some, I'm not sure if it was specifically Colombia, but I think basically because the protesters were camping on the ground, I think one of the presidents basically said, if you stay, you will not graduate. And I think we made an episode about that, and that sounded good, but I believe that nothing really came out of that. Although I think some were, in a sense, blocked for a little bit. But yeah, that should be, that would be a minimum. Basically, if you violate the rules of the university, at the minimum, you should be held back for a year. They should not give you your diploma. Or they should give you the diploma with some sort of like something. There should be consequences. Like this is the big problem with basically, yeah, the students. They are in their, depending, they are probably in their like middle 20s, and they still, in a sense, haven't experienced the real world. From the being children until now, they've just been basically in the school system. They haven't really worked. They haven't, and many of them, because of that, have no no accountability. No, there are no consequences for your actions. I've mentioned, I think I talked about yesterday how these like Russian dictators sort of forgot the basic rule of philosophy, which is, or one of them at least, which is basically that actions have consequences. And these students are in a similar. They think they can just do whatever they want, and they will never be consequences after that. And because they are young and stupid, I want to give them some sort of a break. I think, but you have to punish them somewhat. You don't throw them in jail for the rest of their life, but there has to be something. You will lose your diploma, or you will be banned from the university for 5 years. And if you want to finish your diploma, go into the real world and come back 5 years later. Some sort of accountability, some sort of consequence. So people know that if they, as Michael said, if you support a terrorist organization, something should happen after that. There should be some consequence of it after.
Well, there's two things to bear in mind. One, the law. I was a prosecutor for almost 18 years, and I have to agree with Michael. There really is no DA, except on political matters like trying to go after Trump. Whatever you think of Trump, that's when it's the only time New York City really has a DA. But they did refuse. There were crimes committed. Force was used against other people. That is criminal, and the DA there just dropped the ball. And that, of course, tells these students that there will be no consequences. You can violate other people's rights. You can threaten people. You can occupy their property. You can break windows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the masks weren't the problem. They could have prosecuted them. As Michael again points out, many of these students were easily identifiable. The DA and the law enforcement decided just not to do it. Now in New York, they're proposing a rule against wearing masks. That is to say, if you have a health reason, of course, you can do it. If you have a religious purpose, you can do it. But if you're just wearing a mask to cover your identity, okay, you are it seems to me that during once upon a time, the communists in this country were very proud of being communists. When McCarthyism came along, what they called McCarthyism, when communism became a dirty word after the Cold War, the Congress, for whatever you think of these congressional hearings, they would ask these communists, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" And they would refuse to answer on the grounds of the Fifth Amendment. Well, wait a minute. A famous ex-communist named Max Eastman in 1950 said, well, wait a minute. When I was a communist, if someone had put a microphone in front of me, I would have happily and proudly said, you're darn right, I'm a Marxist, and this is why I'm a communist. So if you're hiding your face during a protest, now think about that. I don't want to be known as associated with this glorious moral cause. What kind of a contradiction is that? No, the only subtext here is I want to be able to threaten people. I want to be able to violate rights. I want to be able to get away with something. Because if it really was just stand up and make a point, I would be taking off that mask and being the first person in line to be photographed by the news cameras. I'd be proud of my position. No, if you're not proud of your position during a, quote, protest, you're trying to get away with something nefarious, it seems to me. Now, and it seems perfectly reasonable when there is a question of safety in violent protests to restrict the use of masks. It's robbers, it's bank robbers who use masks. It's robbers in the Old West who use masks. Now, when it comes to consequences on the private employment side, there are students who are denied their diplomas every year at major universities because they have violated campus rules. In this case, they not only violated campus rules, as I say, they violated the criminal law. Under those conditions, the university has every right to deny them the diploma. These were the conditions, these were the rules that we told you about before you ever applied to our university, and you have to obey them. Otherwise, you don't get this diploma. Okay, they have what happened to the other students? You'll notice they canceled the graduation ceremonies at Columbia and UCLA. What about the rights of those students to have a graduation ceremony? No, they didn't get a graduation ceremony. But as you pointed out, after some delays, these pro Hamas thugs end up getting their diplomas. But I have to agree with Michael here. There is there should be consequences. If their free speech, of course, they went beyond anything like free speech or freedom of association. But if they have freedom of speech and freedom of association, then Michael has freedom of speech and freedom of association, and he doesn't have any obligation to hire these thugs. He has every right as a private employer, as a private business organizer, to say, no, I'm not going to have pro-Hamas people. I'm not going to have Nazis. I'm not going to have communists working for my organization. And that's not a violation of your rights. To tell him he has to would be a violation of his rights. And again, there's a certain kind of social consequence outside of the legal consequence that, again, should be there. But that tells you something about the moral state of your culture, doesn't it? There are, bless them, wealthy alumni who are now withholding their money from these universities and trying to expose these little thugs. Good for them, and not hiring these thugs. Absolutely, there should be consequences. Now, if one of them has a change of heart and can prove to me over a period of time that he no longer advocates violence, that he's suddenly gotten rational, I'll reconsider perhaps. But I am not forced to hire someone because they have some freedom of speech. Their freedom of speech doesn't require me to give them a job or to sanction them in any way, whatever. So yeah, there's been a failure on the part of the DA of New York. There's a failure on the part of the university president. Yeah, and there has been some private pushback on sanction, but not nearly enough. We should, as Michael says, want to expose these little thugs for the dangerous maniacs that they really are.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly comment on the issue of the masks. I think it should probably be a university rule. I mean, I don't see any reason why private university can have whatever regulation on clothes they want. But when it comes to sort of like government banning, I could see some sort of regulation maybe on this like public protest. But usually I dislike these sort of things because it usually comes from the government refusing to do what its actual job is and trying to find a way around it. So because as we said, the DA just refused to prosecute these people, and now he's trying to find, oh well, maybe we should ban masks. No, just do your job. Prosecute people who break laws or get them through the process. If they are innocent, they will be proven innocent in the court of law, and just get through the process. Don't try to find these shortcuts. Don't try to find these sort of like different rules or make new rules, new regulations to push the issue somewhere else. Do your job.
Well, if I could just comment, I think it would depend very much on the context. If you're having an experience where there are violent protests or a spate of bank robberies in a certain neighborhood, it would seem to me that you could have a reasonable rule that says, and you'd have to acknowledge all the peaceful, reasonable purposes for masks. Health purposes, some people are immune compromised. Religious purposes, I could understand that even. You've got to allow them to be free to wear masks under proper circumstances. But if you've got a particular context in which let's say there's bank robberies in this neighborhood, you say, I'm sorry, you can't wear masks except for these legitimate purposes. And that's the way the New York law that they've proposed is written. That is to say, if you have a health reason to wear a mask, or if you have a religious reason, you can certainly wear the mask. If you're doing it simply to disguise your identity in this context, then we have an issue. And it's really designed, and I grant you that it really should be focused on the acts of violence and the demonstrations where they're violating people's rights. They're trying to get away with it. And they should be able to say that at protests or demonstrations, no wearing of masks. And see, that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid that'll run afoul of the First Amendment. But in my view, it does not. Force is not freedom of speech. Threatening people, blocking streets, taking over property, that's not freedom of speech. That's the initiation of physical force. And that is and restricting that, the use of masks, say, during a forceful or violent protest is not a violation of anyone's First Amendment rights. It seems to me. On the other hand, if the government is just willy-nilly saying, no, you can't wear something, of course that would be a violation of your rights. But I think it's context dependent. Just my expert legal opinion there. I think it's context dependent on whether or not the government can restrict your ability to wear masks. In this context, it's very interesting because the people who are saying we should be free to wear masks at protests are saying we should be able to hide our identities so we can get away with force. We don't want to have those secondary consequences, like people not hiring me. Michael won't give me a job, you see, if he finds out that I've been in one of these protests. So that's why I'm wearing a mask. Your right to protest does not include your right to secretly hide your views so you can force some people to not do something and then later get away with it and have no secondary consequences. No, that's not how rights work.
Okay, I just want to quickly comment. I think it is a problematic. I think it is this sort of like secondary way of dealing with issues, because everything you mentioned pretty much, it's either should be solved by a school regulation, if there is some sort of organized protest, some sort of organized rally, don't have masks, don't hide your identity, and there should be no public. I don't believe in public property, so I don't think there should be any regulation when it comes to use of public property, or at least I think that's again going around the actual issue, that is getting rid of the actual public property. So maybe you could make a pragmatic argument, but I think I'm so fundamentally opposed to basically over regulation because of basically you make one regulation that creates so many problems that you have to create more regulation to deal with those issues. So I think I'm fundamentally opposed to it. But I think we should Michael, if you want to add something, and then
No, I don't. I'm definitely in the context camp, but and I agree with you that people skirt their responsibility. I mean, I think a big maybe a way to extrapolate this without getting into the details of it is that people seem to think they can have their cake and eat it too. You can have any set of beliefs that you want, but you must accept the responsibility for those beliefs. And one of the fundamental problems with communism is that it only allows for there to be a fixed amount of stuff, and it assumes that more stuff is going to be forthcoming somehow, but leaves it up to the people that produce stuff to make sure that it always happens. The trouble is there's no incentive anymore. So you can believe that communism is a great thing and we're going to redistribute the wealth, but the wealth was produced by people. And those people that are creating the wealth, which are the people that work the hardest, are not going to continuously create the wealth if there's no incentive. And you don't have to agree with capitalism or communism or either, but you do have to create a rational A to B to C to D with things that connect. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of faith-based axioms, which we know as humans have failed. And I would say that almost all of the progress of humanity has been based on rational thought. And the notion that, for instance, the world is flat, which is obviously wrong, was based on some kind of misinformation. And the notion when a patient is coming in with metastatic lung cancer, that they're going to get better because God wills it, or that it's just if I hope or wish they would get better, is crazy. We all know that we have to, give them the best medicines that we have, and we're probably going to lose the game eventually anyway, but we can hopefully make this person have a better life for longer than they otherwise would have. You've got to deal with reality. And this notion for these kids and what's being taught in school, which is including my alma mater, Amherst College, this notion that the capitalists who are funding our alumni funds, our giant funds that are billions of dollars, you're teaching them to hate capitalists, but you're going and asking for a handout tomorrow. That's called hypocrisy. You're teaching people that the entire Western world was oppressive to everybody. And the fact is that more people have a better life today than ever in the history of humankind ever had. And so on and so forth. The companies that we all turn to for Apple, Amazon, Tesla, these companies that have improved our lives immensely, The pharmaceutical companies, for all of their problems, who have extended people's lives with vaccines, saved the COVID crisis, but HIV, HCV, everything. These groups, we love to bash them. I don't love to bash them. I actually applaud them. But they're teaching this in school. And this is the fundamental problem, that we have a bunch of hypocrisy with academics sitting in some kind of insular area. And I for the life of me, can't understand what is their motivation to essentially destroy. They're trying to destroy Western culture. And I'm not saying that paranoid. Go look at what's being taught in schools. It's anti-capitalist, anti-success, oppressor, oppressed. The worse you are, the better you are. It's nuts. And
Yeah.
it's primarily, it's why I said the humanities. It's primarily in the humanities departments, who don't have to answer to any demonstrable 1 + 1 = 2 result. And the kids are completely blown away. Their parents are, for whatever reason, unable to rein them in. And every new thing that happens, these kids jump up and down on it, instead of actually creating value and doing something novel in the world. You want to help the world? Go out and create something that's going to help them.
Yeah, and just to comment about the idea how basically the successful, the big businesses are hated. I mean, just look at the current or the recent Google ruling, basically saying that they are engaging in monopolistic activities. You know, people are celebrating, people are calling for the breaking up of Google. And, you know, why is Google in its position? It's because it's good. It's because, I mean, just imagine. I mean, I don't know that world, but I think you guys know the world before Google, before you had search engines. It was terrible. You couldn't, like, Google has made internet great. And companies like Google have made the internet great, have made the internet accessible to everyone and possible to be used. I mean, we are using it right now, even directly by using YouTube. Uh, Google has created the market for many people to basically do what they want to do, and they are being punished because of it. Now it's taken as a granted. The internet as it is right now, the internet as it was created, is now taken for granted, and Google can be broken up, and people are okay with hating on Google. But whenever I talk about things like this, or whenever I talk about the problems, I always like to take accountability first, and I always like to focus. And I think this is the problem of the actual the founders of these companies and the CEOs of these companies. They do not defend themselves. When they want to defend themselves, they say, but we give to charity. But we try to help people. We try to give money to universities. We have these programs that are giving more opportunity to people of color or to women. Instead of saying, we've created the greatest business ever. I mean, don't even talk about creating jobs. We've provided a product for thousands, millions, billions of people, and celebrate us, or, you know, maybe don't say something like that, but we should be celebrated for that, or we should be appreciated. Why are we being vilified for what we're doing? And I think that's, if we had one, two people like that, CEOs who would say that. I mean, I remember the when Mark Zuckerberg was brought up before Congress, and that was terrible to see. I mean, these senators were like, they had no idea what Facebook is. They have no idea why it's successful. They had no business talking to him. And I wished Mark Zuckerberg would just stand up and walk away and say, "You have no right to say anything to me." And I wish we need one person like that. And
Daniel, can I just jump in
yeah,
here,
yeah.
because it's a chord close to mine. First of all, it's the anti-success culture being taught by universities primarily. And it is despicable, and it's contrarian to the notion of excellence anyway. But I will tell you, Zuckerberg is one person, and he's in the social network area. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of the largest bank, I think the largest bank in the world, JP Morgan Chase, or one of the largest banks in the world, and sort of an icon in American banking for sure, was pulled in front of Congress, and he could not explain why he makes 300 times more money or whatever the number was than the lowest paid. This is a banker who could not explain it. Now, he knows why he makes more, and I know why he makes more. And it is a problem in our culture that success is not celebrated and glorified. It is to some extent. I mean, you see, for instance, wonderful movies about Steve Jobs, that some of them trying to give a balanced thing, but we all know he created one of the greatest companies on the planet. And you see mixed reviews, of course, about Musk and Tesla, but I think everybody's pretty clear that he changed the world. And frankly, all the leftists should be thrilled because he made electric cars a reality. But of course, they hate him because he makes a lot of money. So we have a philosophical problem. And unfortunately, the notions of life, in my opinion, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, coupled with reason, purpose, and self-esteem, which is how we got there, have gone away from American teaching, at least, and probably in the UK as well, and France and Germany, infiltrated by a lot of people who've come from other places, because our political people have refused to stand up, and say you have to have legal immigration. What a concept, legal immigration. But getting back to it, I think it's fairly straightforward what's going on here. We have Merck inventing a drug, one last one, Merck inventing a drug initially for animals for some of the worm infections they got, and called ivermectin, and it ended up being exported for free to Africa, and it cures river blindness. It was the main cause of blindness on the planet. And it was more people in Africa, young people, that would lose their sight because of this onchocerciasis parasite worm that infected them and knocked out their sight. And this drug cured it for free. This was not by some hope and feeling. This was by chemistry and investment and testing, etc. And we ought to cheer these people, because these are the heroes in the world.
We ought to
James?
celebrate. Yeah, we ought to celebrate them. We ought to praise them. They ought to be heroes instead of being the villains that they are.
Yes.
You know, who are the people who are most cheering the Google antitrust case? It's Republicans. What do we get from the Republican convention? We get people like J.D. Vance saying, "Oh, corporation, we have to renounce. The Republican Party has to renounce any support for corporate America. We're a working man's party now." So you see, both sides are deeply affected by. And these talk about hypocrisy, Michael. The universities are happy to take huge donations from wealthy, successful alumni. Oh yeah, when it comes to rich people giving them millions of dollars, they're happy to take it that way. But of course, it is suicide for these alumni to do that, just as it's suicide for business people to be the cowards that you describe. I can understand what the woke businesses are really, really hard for me to understand, because you'd think most businesses would try to be apolitical so that they don't alienate any part of the market, so you keep as broad a market as possible. But when things like antitrust come around, when you've got people that hostile to corporations, then corporations, if they have any sense of their own self-esteem, that they should stand up and say, no, this is morally wrong. We have a right to our profits. We created these products. Think of all the just as Michael has pointed out. Just in his field, in medicine. Just think about all of. I might not be here if smart people before me hadn't developed things like the smallpox vaccine or the polio vaccine, things like that. How many children survived, right, that didn't previously survive childhood or come out maimed for life from polio or something? What do we owe these geniuses in medicine? What do we owe, like Steve Jobs? They take a tiny little percentage as their profit, and they get denounced because they make $1 billion for creating a value that creates many, many, many times that value for the rest of us. So it's a hatred of the good for being the good. It stems from the universities. These universities are teaching anti-achievement, resentment, hatred of the good for being the good, just as Ayn Rand identified. And it's now affected everyone right across the political spectrum. What we need, as you point out, Daniel, are some business leaders with some moral clarity who'll stand up and say, yeah, you're damn right I made $1 billion. I created value. All my customers were voluntary. I've earned every dime of this. You keep your damn hands off my money. I earned this. And I created this value, you see? You should be giving me props and kudos for that rather than denouncing me just for being rich. I mean, it is insane. We hate value. We hate achievement. Anything that's good is denounced. And you'll notice anything that's weak, a disvalue, even if it's immoral and corrupt, a violent thug, a criminal, you name it, they've got more value than an achiever, someone who's actually done something, built a business, built a bridge, invented a medical procedure, given me my Mac computer, written a book, for God's sake, that does something worthwhile. Rather than praise achievers and creators, what we do is we give all of our mawkish support to the disvalue, to the criminal, the thug, you name it. If you don't have value, you're a hero. If you're the weaker one, Hamas, you see, as opposed to strong Israel, that how could Hamas, even though it has genocidal intention, explicit genocidal intention on the part of Hamas, they do the atrocities on October 7th. And yet when Israel engages in what can only be described as a gingerly surgical response, they're the ones accused of genocide. It is the same hate, twisting of values, turning of values upside down and inside out, hatred of the good for being the good. It's the strong, the civilized, the value producer that gets all of the negative critique. And of course, it is Hamas, these violent, mystical, collectivist thugs who are raising their children to martyr themselves to destroy Israel, who get all the sympathy. It is hatred of the good for being the good. It's that simple. Ayn Rand nailed it decades ago.
Sure did.
Yeah, and so we have someone saying they are not evil, they are not good. Let's not go crazy. They need to pay the consequence of contaminating. So if these companies are doing something that are violating someone else's property rights, we wouldn't be standing here like, oh no, 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 don't do anything to them. They shouldn't have any special favors, and they shouldn't have any special protections, and they shouldn't be having to do anything special when it comes to some sort of giving back and giving forward. Just let them be, let them do what they did, what they want to do, and if they violate someone's rights, we have courts for that. We think courts have a proper function, but don't prosecute them before they even do something, just for the fact that they are big or that they exist. So we have a few super chats, so let me just quickly go through them. Thank you, Jonathan, for your super sticker, actually. Thank you, Chichi Ryder, for your super chat. He says, free speech, to extent it's feasible, people who know Nazi history and their commie comrades in Germany and Jewish history, how Israel developed and protocols, etc., should publicly debate modern Nazis. So about that specifically, I wonder, yeah, probably, but I wonder to what extent does it work when you have this sort of like public intellectuals debating. I think just generally knowing it, and if you know someone who in a sense is going a bit crazy with conspiracy theories, I think it's best to sort of like try to talk to them and see where they are coming from, and to what extent you can just try to point them in the right direction. But everyone has free will, and if someone really wants to divorce themselves from reality completely, there's nothing you can really do to basically convince them or enforce them. The only thing you can do is provide some perspective, and hope they choose that. And we have one more super chat from Gigi Ryder. Thank you so much. Who says, James Lindsay discussed book Beautiful Trouble and Neo-Communism Strategy of Low-Level Near Violence Provocations for Excess Reaction on video. We might have to check that out. Okay, guys, anything, any last words, maybe about the super chats or just about this topic generally? Let me start with Michael.
Yeah, I'm just, remember Harvard's president is still employed by Harvard. And we have no idea what her salary is, but I understand it's north of $1 million, just for all those people who are worried about people getting lots of money. that's at least at Columbia. We don't think that she's still getting a salary from Columbia, but who knows really? She will be getting some kind of payment, obviously, from the UK government, which is perfectly in keeping with the new UK government. So anyway, 3 down, many to go, but certainly a step in the right direction.
James?
I have to agree with that. It did sound very much like, Joe Biden's voluntarily stepping down on her part when she made that statement. I think they were both voluntarily stepped down with the same kind of
Yes.
degree of voluntariness.
Yes.
Yeah, it is a good sign that she had to go and that she was kind of forced out. And if she was facing criticism, and she said to my family and all that, well, good. See, that's the kind of sanction. My criticism of her is the kind of sanction that she has to either, take the heat or get out of that kitchen. She decided to get out of that kitchen. And I'm glad if we were part of the heat that got her out of that kitchen. But I noticed there's heat on both sides. We have a long way to go, as Michael says. 3 down, a lot more to go. But you know something? If the government stopped subsidizing education, stopped giving these humanities departments billions of dollars every year to teach the crap that they are, notice, friends, you with your tax money, you through taxes and inflation, mind you, are paying for the evil ideology that's coming out of these humanities departments at all these fancy private universities. Government must be separated from education just as strongly and for the same reason as we separate church and state in a civilized country.
And with that, Michael, where can people find you?
Michael Kaufman, 2Fs, LinkedIn.
James, where can people find you?
I'm on Facebook all the time. James Stevens Valiant, Facebook, answering questions every day.
And I'm Damn Dan on YouTube. You can find links to everybody in the description. We will see you tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, bye-bye.
Be safe.